What's up, everybody? I'm here with Chapter 21 of Book 1 of The Ranger's Apprentice, the Early Years series, the tournament at Gorlan. Let's go ahead and get into it. They rode on the next morning. Crowley had overcome his resistance to being elected their leader. It was a bright, sunny day, and the air was crisp and fresh. He whistled softly as he rode, a jaunty little tune about a blacksmith and his lady love. He and Halt were riding side by side. Berrigan and Leander rode behind them, and Egon brought up the rear, riding some 50 meters back, keeping a watchful eye on the trail behind them. From time to time, one of the others would take a turn at being the rear guard. There was little likelihood of trouble, but there was no harm in being ready. Halt glared at his friend as the whistling continued. "I had hoped that your new sense of responsibility would put an end to that painful shrieking noise you make between your lips," he said. Crowley smiled. It was a beautiful day, and he was feeling at peace with the world, and that meant he was more than ready to tease Halt. "It's a jaunty song." "What's jaunty about it?" Halt asked, grim-faced. Crowley made an uncertain gesture as he sought for an answer to that question. "I suppose it's the subject matter," he said eventually. "It's a very cheerful song. Would you like me to sing it for you?" Halt began, but he was too late, as Crowley began to sing. He had a pleasant tenor voice, in fact, and his rendering of the song was quite good. But to Halt, it was as attractive as a rusty barn door squeaking. "A blacksmith from Palladio, he met a lovely lady-o." "Whoa, whoa," Halt said, and, as Abelard obligingly came to a stop, he nudged the horse in the ribs. "Not you, him," he said, pointing to Crowley. "In the future, be more specific," Abelard's withering glance seemed to say. "I'm a horse, not a mind reader." Halt ignored him. Crowley was looking at him, eyebrows raised in interrogation. "He met a lovely lady-o?" Halt repeated sarcastically. "What in the name of all that's holy is a lady-o?" "It's a lady," Crowley told him patiently. "Then why not sing 'He met a lovely lady'?" Halt wanted to know. Crowley frowned, as if the answer was blatantly obvious. "Because he's from Palladio, as the song says. It's a city on the continent, in the southern part of Toscana." "And people there have ladios instead of ladies?" asked Halt. "No, they have ladies, like everyone else. But lady doesn't rhyme with Palladio, does it? I could hardly sing 'A blacksmith from Palladio, he met his lovely lady,' could I?" "It would make more sense if you did," Halt insisted. "But it wouldn't rhyme," Crowley told him. "Would that be so bad?" "Yes. A song has to rhyme, or it isn't a proper song. It has to be lady-o. It's called poetic license." "It's poetic license to make up a word that doesn't exist, and that, by the way, sounds extremely silly?" Halt asked. Crowley shook his head. "No, it's poetic license to make sure that the two lines rhyme with each other." Halt thought for a few seconds. His eyebrows knitted close together. Then inspiration struck him. "Well then, couldn't you sing 'A blacksmith from Palladio, he met a lovely lady,' so?" "So what?" Crowley challenged. In truth, he was more than a little surprised that Halt had come up with an alternative rhyme so quickly, and one that seemed to open up further opportunities for the story. Halt made an uncertain gesture with his hands, as he sought more inspiration. Then he replied, "He met a lovely lady, so he asked her for her hand and gave her a leg of lamb." "A leg of lamb? Why would she want a leg of lamb?" Crowley demanded. Halt shrugged. Maybe she was hungry. In any event, Crowley said, becoming more and more irritated by this conversation, hand and lamb don't rhyme with each other. They assonate, said Berrigan, who had been listening with some interest to this discussion. They have a similar sound. That's quite common in songs, you know. Berrigan, of course, was a musician, and could be considered to be something of an authority when it came to song lyrics. Crowley, feeling as if he were being backed into a corner, turned to him. Well, even if they do aspirate, assonate. The word is assonate, Berrigan corrected him, making it all too obvious that he was hiding a grin. Whatever. Even if they do that, why would he give her a leg of lamb? He's a blacksmith, not a butcher. Maybe, Leander said slowly, he gave her a cattle brand. That rhymes with hand, after all. He asked her for her hand and gave her a cattle brand. That works, he added, looking at Berrigan. Works for me, Berrigan murmured. A cattle brand? Why would he give her a cattle brand? Crowley had once seen a bear being attacked from 3 different directions by hunting dogs. He began to feel a great deal of sympathy for that bear. But Leander wasn't cowed by the scorn in his voice. Because he's a blacksmith, isn't he? And blacksmiths make things like cattle brands. You know, branding irons. So maybe she'd asked him for one so she could brand her cattle. And he gave her one. That is idiotic, Crowley snapped. But Leander merely shrugged. It's no sillier than calling her a lady-o. After all, we don't call ourselves rangeros, do we? And we don't ride horsey-os, Halt said, rejoining the discussion with some relish. It wasn't often that he was able to get the better of Crowley in one of these arguments. Crowley had a quicksilver brain and tongue, and Halt was enjoying this rare moment of ascendancy. Crowley reined in Cropper, and glared around at his 3 companions, who were all smiling fondly at him, and obviously enjoying themselves far too much. Very well, he said sharply. Remember last night, when you all elected me commander? He paused, and they all nodded. Because you said, he looked severely at Halt, there might come a time when we couldn't agree on something, and I'd have to make a decision. Halt nodded. That wasn't exactly what he'd said, but it was close enough to, he thought. In that case, Crowley said, I choose to invoke that authority now. As your elected leader, I make this decree. He didn't give her a leg of lamb, or a cattle brand, or even a slice of ham. Oh, that's not bad, Berrigan interrupted, but Crowley's withering glare silenced him almost as soon as he spoke. As leader of this group, I say she was a lady-o. Clear? The others exchanged a glance, wondering if they could keep this going a little longer. Crowley raised his voice. I said, is that clear? Halt, Berrigan, and Leander all nodded. So this discussion is now officially closed. I declare it so in my position as your elected leader, who must be obeyed. Is anyone unhappy with that? No, Crowley, they all said, eyes downcast, like guilty schoolboys, although he noticed that their shoulders were shaking with mirth. He took a breath, preparing to berate them further, when Egon spoke. He had ridden up to join them when they stopped in the middle of the track to debate song lyrics. There was a mild note of condemnation in his voice. Has it escaped your collective notice, he asked, that there's a rider waiting for us? They all looked up in surprise. Egon was right. There was a rider sitting in the middle of the track, some 30 meters away. He was mounted on a shaggy black horse, wore a camouflaged cloak, and had a longbow held across his thighs. Obviously, he was a ranger. Halt and Crowley exchanged a guilty look. They had been so intent on their ridiculous discussion that they had failed to notice the rider. Perhaps, Halt thought hopefully, he had been concealed in the trees until a few minutes ago and had only just ridden out onto the track. "Good morning," Crowley called. The newcomer touched his heels to his horse's flanks and walked slowly forward until he was only a few meters away. "Good morning," he said. He flicked his cowl back from his head and twitched his cloak back over his shoulders. Crowley caught a quick gleam of silver at the man's throat. The silver oak leaf, symbol of a ranger. The man had blonde-white hair and a neat, carefully trimmed beard. His face was pale, and his eyes were a piercing blue. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, older than Crowley, younger than Egon. "Can we help you?" Crowley asked, and the man shifted in his saddle. "Perhaps," he said. "I'm Norris, former ranger of Holsworth Fief. I've heard rumors about a small group of other rangers like myself, recruiting members to face Baron Morgarath of Gorlan Fief. I thought you might be them." "And so we are," Crowley said, smiling a welcome. But the smile faded with Norris's next words. "As I said, I thought you might be them, until I heard the utter tommyrot you've just been discussing." "Oh," said Crowley, a little embarrassed. "I think you caught us at a bad time." "I think so," Norris said. Obviously, a lively sense of humor wasn't one of his qualities. Crowley was just exercising his new authority as leader of the group, Halt put in, with a smile. Norris turned his gaze to the Hibernian. "He's your leader?" Halt nodded. "Elected him last night," he said. Norris studied Crowley for some time and pursed his lips. "Was that a wise choice, do you think?" Halt took a deep breath. In addition to having no sense of humor, Norris apparently had no sense of tact either. "Tell me," Halt said eventually, "do you understand the concept of a joke?" Norris sat up straighter in the saddle, looking a trifle affronted by the question. "Of course I do," he said. "I have an excellent sense of humor." Halt's eyebrows shot up before he could stop himself. In his experience, people who claimed to have an excellent sense of humor usually had none at all. "Well, what you heard was a joke. We were joking," he said, enunciating the last three words slowly and distinctly. Norris looked doubtful. "Didn't sound very funny to me." Halt shrugged. "You had to be there to appreciate it," he said. I was right here," Norris protested. Halt shook his head slowly. "My point exactly. You were here. You had to be there." Now Norris looked confused, so Halt decided to explain. "That was another joke," he said. "It wasn't very funny." Crowley decided it was time he stepped in and smoothed things over. "So, Norris, tell us about yourself," he said, in a friendly tone. Norris, still frowning over Halt's professed joke, turned back to Crowley. "I've been a ranger for 8 years," he said. "Served the last 5 at Holsworth Fief, close to here. Then, a few weeks ago, I received a letter dismissing me from the Corps. It was delivered by a puffed-up twerp who had been sent to replace me. Said he was acting under Lord Morgarath's authority." Apparently, Morgoth has decided to come out into the open and usurp the king's authority, Crowley replied. Up until now, he's made it look as if those letters of dismissal have come from the king. Morgoth's next move will be to claim the crown for himself, I should think. We plan to stop him. He paused, then voiced a thought that had been running through his mind. You said you'd heard about us? Norris shrugged. Just general rumors. Word gets around, you know. Halt and Crowley exchanged a look. We'd better pick up the pace, Halt said. It won't be long before word about what we're doing gets back to Morgoth. True. The red-headed ranger turned back to Norris. So, Norris, can you put up with Halt's bad jokes long enough to join us? Halt snorted indignantly. My bad jokes? He said, under his breath. But Norris didn't hear him. He nodded, his face very serious. I suppose so, if it'll give me a chance to get a shot at Morgoth. He touched the longbow lying across his knees. Crowley held out his hand. Welcome to our band. All right, that's going to bring us to the conclusion of chapter number 21. As always, thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening. And I'll see you next time in chapter 22. God bless, and have a good one.